Mysuru Lit Fest. So you have no idea how privileged we are feeling today to be presenting to all of you. So before I start, I just have a question. How many of you are poetry people? How many of you love poetry? Whoa, that's so nice, that's so nice. Normally, poetry people are a small niche in this whole wide world of words. So I'm so delighted we have so many poetry people in the audience with us today. So my first question to my wonderful panelists, whom I will introduce first. As you can all see, we're an all-women's panel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, it wasn't deliberate. I did shortlist some men who are also good poets, but it just happened this way, and I think the flavor of my year is women in poetry, because some months ago, Rochelle and I, we organized a poetry festival in Bangalore, completely run by women, completely. So on the final felicitation, there were 40 women on the stage, and not one man. The entire poetry festival was organized by women. Somehow, the flavor seems to have stayed, and we are an all women's poetry panel for you today. We have such extraordinary poets presenting today. You know, they're passionate, they're gifted. They come with activism, because poetry with activism has its own flavor. So I'm going to start with Rochelle Potkar, is an acclaimed author and poet whose works like 4 Degrees of Separation and Paper Asylum have won her accolades. She mentors, you know what I love about her is she mentors aspiring writers in very exciting writing programs. And currently, she's on a nationwide tour with a new collection of poems, Coins and Rivers, that she'll be talking about today. She walks, Rochelle, everything about Rochelle is larger than life. She walks into the world with her passion, her verse, and her verve. That's Rochelle Potkar for you. This beautiful Dr. Sonali Patnaik is a poet, an academic, and a visual artist. She's a visiting professor at St. Xavier's College in Ahmedabad. Her debut collection, When the Flowers Begin to Speak, is acclaimed for its feminist perspective. She's also won several awards for her works. Her poetry is drawn towards making the invisible visible, of revealing truths that are inconvenient and that society often does not wish to talk about. That's Dr. Sonali Patnaik for you. Kavita Ratna. Ratna is a passionate children's rights activist, poet, and a theater enthusiast. She is executive director of the Nobel Peace Prize nominated Concern for Working Children. We are so privileged to have you with here, Kavita. And she tirelessly champions the rights of young people. Her book of poems, Sea Rivers, is a reflection of her inner. Sea Glass is a reflection of her inner and outer world, of themes that are both personal and universal. That's Kavita for you. Sonya Nair, she's my hot favorite right now because she runs the most respected online festival for poetry that attracts the most brilliant minds in Indian poetry from across the world. And she just finished the 2024 edition of her poetry festival, Ananta, completely on her own, with a few volunteers, of course. Out of the 60 sessions over 2 weeks, she personally conducted the conversations for 30 of them. Can you imagine the kind of preparation that goes to organizing one panel? One panel takes a lot of preparation. She did it for 30 panels, and the amount of erudition and the amount of understanding she has, not just of the poet, but of the poetry, is phenomenal. Here we have Sonya Nair for you. Thank you, Sonya, for coming. From Trivandrum, she's also the head of Department of English at the All Saints College in Thiruvananthapuram. That's my panel for you. So, being the first English poetry panel at the Mysuru Lit Fest, My first question to my poets are there poetry people and prose people? Are there poetry people and prose people? Who would like to start? The question is for everybody.
Hi, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. I would have to say that people imagine that there are poetry people and there are prose people. But then really, if you put your minds to it, sometimes some of the most beautiful lines of prose are actually poetry. And vice versa. Like if you take the opening lines of The God of Small Things, which coincidentally is a favorite for all of us, that's poetry. And you take a poem like The Wasteland and its opening lines, it's the entire thing. If you just don't put the line breaks into account, that's prose for you. But people seem to imagine that poetry is something very exclusive or that it kind of flies over your head and things like that. So they don't really want to look at poetry. And I was one of them. I did not really appreciate or even bother reading much of poetry unless I was compelled to by my studies. You know, the obligatory solitary reaper and I think palanquin, yes, daffodils and palanquin bearers, wala, that kind of thing. You were forced to learn it. But then there came a turning point in my life, and I think that will come in the course of questioning. So yes, so people just prefer to put themselves into those boxes, but I think there's no such thing, technically.
So Rochelle, yeah, you write award-winning poetry books and you write award-winning prose books. Are you a poet first or a prose writer?
So my answer, actually, I was concurring with Sonya that as a creator or a creative writing person who writes in different genres, prose, poetry, non-fiction, opinion pieces, long-form journalism, whatever that might be, is like groundwater under the ground. It's one and the same thing. It's an aquifer. It's only when you come on top that you have borders like drawn on land. That way you have the shelves in a bookstore or a library. So the segregation is up. Down, everything is one because it's part of a collective unconscious. And when we emerge whatever we are thinking about and we write it, the styles and the tones may make it a certain genre and then it goes into the market. But in our collective unconscious, it's one and the same thing.
Okay, yes, I'm audible. Yeah, I wanted to add to what was being discussed. In fact, I had mentioned to Sonya that I read God of Small Things when I was very young. I was in 11th grade. And honestly, it's not so much the novel of it, but the poetic quality of the writing that spoke to me. So these, boundaries, as Rochelle was saying, that we maintain, I'm not even sure any writer thinks about it when they write. You write because you're compelled to write. So I started writing when I was very young. I wrote prose first. I didn't choose to be a poet. In a way, poetry chose me. I don't want to sound sentimental, but sometimes our subjects choose us, forms choose us, right? When I was writing prose, it's very interesting. I was deeply influenced, as we all are. We're colonized by Enid Blyton. So I used to be in Bombay and I used to write things like, I had this very interesting day and then something like there was a fairy tale and so on. It's only when I got to, I would say, the late pubescent age where emotions and so on, since we are a panel that's talking about emotions, became very intense in me, I think poetry came out. Right? So it's also about what you want to convey. Often poetry people don't want to necessarily just convey a story. They also want to convey their interior architecture to you. A lot of my students write poetry. I don't know if they're poetry or prose people, but they do it because of the age and space that they're in. You know, they feel compelled to put it out there, to put their voices out there. So poetry is really like a language of the self, and who doesn't, you know, have a sense of self? We're all poetry people. And I just want to quickly add also that a lot of Indian literature, and all literature is actually poetry and we don't realize it. Shakespeare is poetry, right? Mahabharatas, Ramayana, so many folk tales, oral literature are all written in the poetic form. It's just that it's not sold as poetry. Right, so it has a lot to do with the publishing world as well. I think writers are writers, and some write poetry, some write prose, some write both. You know.
Yeah, if I may add, and so beautifully you said, I was about to say Shakespeare is poetry, you know, including the iambic pentameter and how we learn to say it. And I think also that in prose there are so many forms of prose. There is no one prose, there is no one poetry. And I think fundamentally, like you said, it's all about communicating and whatever form communicates. And I think as poets, sometimes we are stuck with the form, especially in some very esoteric forms. It is, you can do this and you cannot do this. And most often people are saying, no, we'll walk the middle ground. Because what I want to say is more important, not how I want to say it. And what I want to say is to communicate and how I touch the other. And I think the whole idea, the fact that we're having this very first time, is also probably because there's an understanding that poetry has been put up in the upper shelf somewhat. And maybe we are at fault in terms of making it more complex than it needs to be. I think talking to people, and like the young people writing, and some extraordinary rap that's coming up in English and multiple languages of India, I think they're extraordinary. They're very powerful. And a lot of young people I work with relate to it. Not so much for the form, but the fact that they emote, they bring a commitment to it. And I think when prose does it, poetry does it, theater does it, even non-fiction does it, it'll communicate.
Yeah, this is just a bit of a demo of what we were all talking about. This, when it is read like this, May in Imanam is a hot brooding month. The days are long and humid. The river shrinks and black crows gorge on bright mangoes in still dust green trees. Red bananas ripen, jackfruits burst, dissolute blue bottles hum vacuously in the fruity air. Then they stun themselves against clear window panes and die, fatly baffled in the sun. Now you read it like this. May in Imanam is a hot brooding month. The days are long and humid. The river shrinks and black crows gorge on bright mangoes in still dust green trees. Red bananas ripen, jackfruits burst. Dissolute blue bottles hum vacuously in the fruity air. Then they stun themselves against clear window panes and die, fatly, baffled in the sun. Poetry.
You know, it's very interesting. When we organized our poetry festival in March this year, we had a little competition for the adults and for the older poets and the children. And one 9-year-old second prize winner came after listening to the adults poet speak. And she says, Auntie, they're just really talking, they're not rhyming. So she says, we rhyme, they don't rhyme. Will somebody explain to the 9-year-old why you're not rhyming? Who would like to explain?
I think, yeah, well, free verse is a style of poetry, of course, but if I wanted to just speak from the 9-year-old's perspective, I think poets are lyrical, so we don't sometimes have to rhyme. Even in free verse, I feel like poets are rhyming. They are bringing lyricism to the written form. That's something that, for me, is poetry. They're bringing emotions, lyricism, and so on. I often feel, really, that poets are like philosophers who have a musical ear. you know. So whether they're writing in free verse, and we are all, I think we write in very various ways, or they're writing like rap. Rap is rhythm and poetry, isn't it? A lot of young people relate to it because of that, because of the poetic quality. It's also got rhythm. So whether you rhyme or not, it is rhythmic. Poetry is rhythmic. That's what I would think.
I wanted to say the same thing. I think we rhymed when we were doing nursery rhymes so that we could remember, and all the oral storytelling needed to rhyme because they passed down in oral forms and people needed to remember them. So the remembering or the recall caused the rhyme. But once you have a print and paper and you have all that with you, what we focus on now, poetry does, is rhythming. And that rhythming is so beautiful because not only is it phonetic, but it is better than the forced rhyming that comes out. Because when you write brain, you have to write train. And you have to write rain because you're forcing your thoughts to rhyme. But when you rhythm, you actually excavate so much more meaning in what you really wanted to say.
I think I stopped using rhyme because it was constricting me. It was restricting me, my choice of words, I think. That was quite young. I mean, I stopped doing that quite even in school. But I think later, I think we are looking in poetry a kind of a cadence, which is inner. It's an inner cadence and in alignment to what you're trying to experience. And I think more and more in many forms, even in something like haiku, which is actually rather rigid, people are moving away from the syllable counting and insistence on season words and things like that. Because I think at one point they served a purpose. I'm sure rhyming served a purpose, exactly like you're saying. But when it no longer serves a purpose, I don't think we need it. That's what I would probably tell the 9-year-old.
Very interesting. You know, each of our poets here have completely different styles. You'll hear their poetry shortly. They respond to different themes and triggers. So my question to our poets here next is, where does your poetry come from?
So I think my poetry comes from whatever disturbs me or amuses me, and that kind of festers and it doesn't go away. Also, I must say that poetry, because I write in short story forms, screenplays, I write novels, novellas. What I notice with poetry is you don't have time to think. Forget about outlining. You can't outline a poem and you can't write it piecemeal, like I write one stanza today and tomorrow another stanza, like a chapter of a novel. You write it in one go and a poem attacks you. It's almost like a bolt of lightning. It's also like a cough or a sneeze. You don't have time between when the idea comes to you or the inspiration and when you execute it. In poetry, it's at a nanosecond. Yeah, so I think what disturbs me or amuses me, and the world is always in flux. So there's always something that seeps into your psyche and so much that you want to say. And poetry allows you that because it's almost like a telegram from the universe. It's that small. A haiku is this small, and most of the poems are just 1 page long. So it's like an entire telegram or an entire snapshot. And that canvas can be as big as a it can capture so much of history, or it can be just a moment encapsulated. So poems and poetry has that power, that it can be so small and it can even encapsulate an era.
For me, poetry comes from a place of memory and stimuli. Sometimes, I can go months without being affected by anything, not wanting to write about anything. In fact, firmly believing that there is no more poetry left in me. That was the last poem that I wrote about 3 months ago or something. And then, something happens. It could be a smell, it could be a scene, it could be a piece of news. And then you realize you can write. It just comes to you, like Rochelle mentioned, in a flash. And in that flash, the entire poem is quite clear for you. And you write it down. And of course, the process of editing and, kind of making it a better version of itself does happen. But, for example, I was just upset about something really unfair. And then it began to rain. And rain for me is a very pleasant memory, it's a very pleasant phenomenon. And then I thought, I who enjoy rain, this rain must be falling on all those people with whom I am irritated at this point of time. I thought, no, that's not fair. And I thought, I wrote, it rains on me, it rains on you, it rains on us, it rains on them. I hope the rain knows what it is doing. Right? So, and sometimes, thank you, sometimes you go and you visit your ancestral house and it's in ruins, and then you come back, you just can't settle down. And that just brings itself out in the form of poetry. And in fact, I have a poem on my ancestral house, and I have a short story on the house I am living in at this point of time. So it's a matter of the medium and the moment.
Actually, I was just thinking now, reflecting as I'm hearing it, I think things have changed in terms of what moves me over a period of time. I think the largest things which moved me initially was what affected me, things I wanted to react to, and maybe that's a part of the activist in me. So a reaction was more that. And then subsequently, I have noticed also taking attention from what is very ordinary to find the extraordinary in that. I think that movement has happened. Because I think, per se, attention is actually a survival mechanism in human beings. We attend to things which are changing so that there's a fight or flight or freeze response. So we're always attentive to things which are changing. Things which are unchanging, we stop attending to it because they have become so routine, you're no longer noticing them. Like they say that in long-term relationships even, But to actually come back and bring back the attention to what is so ordinary, but there is extraordinary in that. I think that is a movement I have seen in myself. And I also draw a parallel to my own spiritual journey in that as well. So more than reacting, going inwards, more than looking at large, extraordinary, earth-shattering things, to something which is very simple and close, but still tremendous meaning. I can see that. And that change has happened over a period of time, probably over the years. So it was very interesting to reflect on it even, your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita. Beautiful. Yeah, I'll quickly respond. I have a 4-line poem. It goes like this. You may cut my tongue with the blade of your hate. You may cut my tongue with the blade of your hate. I will bleed truth through other gates. For me, poetry is that other gate. It's a form of truth-telling. It's a form of reclaiming a self that may have been silenced by society, that may have been lost because of the pressures, the burdens, all forms of silences that as a woman, as a free-thinking individual, as a questioning individual that I have to go through. So that's poetry for me. I can't do that with any other form of fiction. I can't be moved. I completely agree with all the co-panelists. You're moved by something external or internal, and then poetry appears. Imagine, one of my poems is about the tribal activist Soni Sori. I don't know how many of you remember her, Chhattisgarh activist, and she was she was raped and tortured in police custody. I can't sit and weave a full-blown story about it when I am feeling extremely angry and in pain as a woman, watching that happen. The law is supposed to protect us, and how is the law doing this? So then I will bleed it out in the form of a poem. So for me, poetry is that. It's the shattering of silences, it's the breaking of chains, it's that other gate that I can speak through.
That's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, can you write on command? The reason I'm asking you this is that, like you say, the poetry just happens. It just happens for me. Like you, sometimes I think the last poem I wrote was I'm dead now. There's no poetry left, and then suddenly it happens again. There's this very famous American poet called Ruth Stone, and she says, sometimes her poetry comes faster than she can catch it. So she runs behind it, and then, like you draw the water from the well, she draws it in, and you won't believe it, her poem, she's able to write backwards From the end of the poem, she writes backwards, and when it's done, it's her complete poem. I mean, she must be some extremely extraordinary, gifted woman. But my question to you is, have these things happened for you? Miraculous things happened for you? And my second question is, can you write on command? Like if we had a session here and I gave you a prompt, can you all write poetry? The miracle and the...
So I'm not sure whether I could draw, like I ran to the well to draw it out. That's a beautiful, also a metaphor, because poetry is water. Finally, when we have to simplify it, I would say prose or fiction is food, but you need water to digest life, to digest existence. Because poetry or water fills those sieves that cannot be complete or filled with any kind of other form of any other kind. You need abstraction to fill those very tiny sieves of existence. And also poetry lovers are those people who are thirsty, more thirsty than what other people are, because when nothing else quenches you, you come to poetry. So we saw that in the uncertainty of the pandemic, when everything was in chaos and there were dead bodies everywhere, most of the world turned to poetry. Why? Did poetry give an answer? Yes, it did, in a very abstract algorithm. But no, I don't think I have ran to claim a poem, but yes, I do remember sometimes poems came to me in dreams and I had to wake up immediately to write them down. So that happened, and I cannot write on demand. I can not even write a story or a screenplay on demand. It all comes from inside. Therefore, when my students ask me, ma'am, give me a prompt, a writing prompt, I say that's not the way, that's outside in. Go inside out. Your prompts should come from your life. What matters to you, how you are provoked, that's your prompt. So I don't think I can write.
Beautiful.
Actually, I could write on prompt, not because the prompt is what is prompting me, but the prompt brings my attention to a certain memory which I have somewhere else, and it helps me to bring that out. So it's not something created, but it's going inwards, but using the prompt to dive back into that. So that's possible. But so interesting, you just mentioned these dream inputs which come. I have a very short poem, because in terms of where do these ideas come from, and I'd like to read this actually. It's about disappearing images, and between that moment of sleeping and waking, phrases and images pregnant with possibilities melt into nothingness when eyes open wide. What remains is a quiet longing to recapture what is lost, then crystal clear, now just a mirage folded into the crevices of the night. Perhaps that's where they belong. One can hear them laughing softly as they dodge the grasp with the wisdom of infants. Someday, they may choose to surface, or not at all. At their reckoning, the chimera within.
It's lovely, lovely.
Really good. I most often don't respond to prompts, because I simply don't have it in me, except under very, very rare circumstances, where I suppose I have a stake in what has been prompted or what has been suggested. Then I can, but otherwise, on the whole, I'm a wild beast in that way.
I love that, wild beast, yeah. No, I also don't write to or can't respond. I would not say, of course there was a prompt given, I can do it. But my question is different. Do we need to write poetry like that? It's closer to what Rochelle was saying. Is it about just the technique of it? Sure, if a word like vermilion came up, I could write. It's a form of focusing, and it probably will be a beautiful poem. But that's not the reason I write. I write because there's something I have to say. So if I was to be able to do that exercise, then it's a very difficult exercise. It can be done. You take a word, but you then tether it to what you have been feeling and wanting to say, and then maybe from it write. But I honestly think that also there is a commercialization of poetry when we simply reduce it to a question of respond to this prompt and respond to. I know that in writing workshops, for instance, this is a necessity. because some people have a block. But if you don't suffer from that, and there are other ways also to do away with a block. So I am not very fond of, let's say, prompts. Not that I can't write, but I want to share something very interesting to this question of having visions. And even I've dreamt a poem, and unlike Rochelle, I'm not that assiduous, I should say. I'm very lazy. I will just let it go. So I don't write it down. But as a professor of literature, I do know there are ancient poets who used to write like that. They would literally have opium or whatever it is, and they would have visions. We have William Blake and we have Coleridge. So I don't want to share what we are on here at this panel. No, jokes aside, so poetry is associated often with a different kind of way of seeing the world. That's why visions and so on, right? It's a different kind of language. So I think what appeals to me more than the idea of being a visionary is that it's a language that's aside of the language that we normally speak. Julia Kristeva, a philosopher, she calls poetic language like the language that you share with your mother before the language of society actually comes in. She terms that the poetic phase. So if poetry is that kind of language, then yes to visions and dreams and so on, but not actually, visions.
How much time do we have? Do we have half an hour? We only have 50 minutes. You can't say that. Ours is a one-hour panel, right? It is a one-hour panel. We have half an hour. Okay, girls, let's go. So we're going to read our poetry for you, okay? We're going to, if it's very abstract, we will deconstruct it for you. We might give you some background, but we really want you to be here with us, to really feel our poetry with us. Welcome to the show.
So I'll share two poems, and since we are threading the theme of feelings, love is one of my very core themes, and maybe I'll stand if that's okay. Love is one of my core themes, and also the shades of love, like how love manifests in different forms. So this one, just to preamble it, as a woman, when I thought of what is the maximum freedom you enjoy, I thought if I was a country, maybe I would have my own flags, my own insignia, my own anthems, my own military and defense, and maybe that would be the maximum. Of course, countries are not free, but I thought I would be the freest country. Anyway, from there, something came about which I wasn't expecting. This is the poem, Surrender. If I were a country, you would be a journalist. And because you are not an empty-headed bloke, out for a quick fix, but investigative, committed, idealist, I would have shot you down a street and left you to bleed. If I were a country and you my journalist, it would be a civil war, one too many. Revolutions, changes in governments, I would have jailed you and kept you on CCTV. If I were a country and you my journalist, I would have played a wait and watch game to see who wears the other, sleep deprived, akin to a Russian sleep experiment. But the more you stare, the more beautiful someone becomes, remember? The more you stare, the more beautiful someone becomes, remember? Many pass the cellars of my mind, few the cellars of my heart. I would blink first. I would give in from dictatorship to democracy. If I were a country and you my journalist, I would let you run a free press and media to change the face of an entire nation. Thank you, thank you. And this second poem, this is the time when I wanted to experiment with English. So besides the feelings that I have of love, it's also about love. Okay, because while, as poets, we have inherited English and we want to be proper all the time, there's a time when I feel like breaking away from language and being improper, being mischievous, being badmash. So this is one of my badmash poems where I actually embody the misogynist or the asshole, and I like the poem actually. So I thought, let me entertain you with that. It's called Bedding Day. When Santosh wanted urgent love marriage in just 15 days, he said, I need girl only for me. She has faith fully for me. He looked for simple things. She should be a non-Facebook user, exceptionally fair, convented, at least matric and virgin, or issueless and innocent divorcee. Completely non-feminist but an extremist, and compassionate, patriotic to country, with a keen desire to increase India's military and sports capabilities. Expert in child raising, H1 visa, no bar, powerful and rich. And congratulations, he found her. Her good name, Priya, from top college, 22 or 21, with a dowry of $10,000. They went for a special wedding party with all drinks included. Whiskey, vodka, gin, child beer, strong rum, then old monk. The marriage hall with unisex laboratories for all those gay people was near Sharma Sweets and Snakes, right side to Anus English Academy, run by Anu Sharma in front of Santosh Taylor's Alteration of Ladies and Gents, and welcome tourist office of We Speak English. At the backside gate, visitors were welcome. Only regrets to their vehicles and no encouragement of beggars. In trust we God. Santosh wedded Priya. They look like hero and heroine with their crowns, no? Said all. They are laughing so much, showing their Colgate teeth. In such a type of marriage, go slow. This is an accident porn area, said an uncle. The gifts were many. Bed sheets and Sony erection phones. Organic ghee from tension-free cows. And condoms in all flavors like hot air balloons. The only villains were the in-laws, who took up the best gifts in compensation. Shoplifters will be prostituted, said Santosh, making his big red eyes. But who were listening? All males and females were busy eating and drinking. Only their dead bodies will go home, he rode, neither on foot nor ambulance. Don't these people know I am yes for Santosh? Satisfaction guarantee? Above all vermins and men's, get my special vitamins. I want 2 children, both men, Yaxiam, Yeli, and Zen. Thank you. This is from my book, Coins in Reverse, and I just have got 7 copies from Bombay, which is out there. Thank you.
Kavita, I'm going to ask each one of us to do 1 poem each, and then we'll come back, because I think we're running short on time. Okay? So 1 poem, and then we'll come back.
We'll have another chance. Yeah, I want to save the last one. Yeah. I had actually a few poems, but I'll start with the first one. Yeah. This one is inspired by a few old perfume bottles. Lined up, trapped, they glitter, pastel-colored fragrances. A layer of dust marking years of patience, saved for some momentous occasion which merits an expensive whiff of celebration. Eyes dim, shades pale, afraid to move, they remain breathlessly still, inhaling in silence. The act of listless waiting shrinks them in mysterious ways. All it takes is a flick of finger. Seals crack. A very ordinary day rushes into tiny confines, drawing out the exotic. In an instant, the air is heady. Tangy, bittersweet perfume precedes every move, unfrittered. A slow motion release. After the brief exhilaration, they blend in, pretending to quietly fade away. The transformation invisible, leaving behind faint traces, conjuring up memories of lost loves, of moments held warm under the eyelids, of dead ends, of paths unfolding beyond horizons, of forever breaking free. Thank you.
Sonia?
So this is called an allegory for God because it's to do with lizards. Many of us are spooked by lizards. I don't know whether it's some primordial memory that they could have once been dinosaurs, but you know, and in our house, my grandmother used to say, "Don't kill the lizards at dusk." Dusk was a time when you couldn't do anything. Apart from blink and breathe, anything you do was like terrible. You couldn't cry at dusk, you couldn't fall down at dusk, you can't cut your nails. I don't know what the matter was. So, and also this, there's this sarcastic statement about lizards that is also, in reference to human beings. That is, a lizard, when it's on the ceiling, thinks it is holding up the ceiling, which is kind of a thing that, where people who are of the least importance somehow assume a lot of importance. It's a kind of a stand-in for that. So this is an allegory for God. You must never kill a lizard at dusk, because after an entire day of pretending to be a fridge magnet, gulping down an unsuspecting insect, darting from corner to cupboard, cupboard to wall-mounted television, wall-mounted television to open bookcase to clock, athlete, fashionista, newscaster, librarian, the guy who keeps the clocks ticking, the calendars flipping, gatekeeper doubling as doorman, he is the lord of the skies who clambers up the ceiling to stop the roof from collapsing. As he simultaneously plays Pac-Man games involving cats, naphthalene, camphor, UV light cages, he too, as the cows come home, as the chickens to roost, he too makes his way to his corner den, grateful for having survived this day. Just before he spots you, the shadow of death. His last words will be, "Damn!" So think before you kill a lizard at dusk and take away his chance at heaven. Thank you.
I think I'll just stand up, and if you don't mind, yeah, that's better. Okay. Reading one of my longer poems. It's from a book called, my only book, When the Flowers Begin to Speak. It's a little serious of a poem, so it's not as funny. I apologize for that. It's about, what I was speaking about earlier, about the fear that society has of women who have no fear. Right? I feel a lot of the violence that women see, or for that matter, a lot of marginal communities, whether it's human beings or otherwise, is actually, ironically, because of the threat, the perceived threat that they somehow embody for other people. Right? So this is what it is. This is called Not Afraid. They are afraid of me. They are afraid of the way their cherished structures of power turn to feather and dance around me like birds at sea to the music of the questions I ask, wave on wave, caves awash. They are afraid that instead of a tongue they could twist in talk of unyielding boundaries like caste, nation, father. There lies a set of truths behind my teeth whose light their seductive kisses cannot meet without turning into ash. Their categories turning sticky the moment there is talk of rights, of corporeal violation, of domestic terror attacks. They pluck their fingers apart at my stitching together what they claim are things disparate. as my songs are spindles unfurling the bloody threads of a bricolage, they're afraid that I join the dots on their whitewashed maps. They're afraid of my music. They're afraid of my magic, my shaman hands, my prophecies, my blind eyes, and my burning art. They're afraid that I will cure them and see them for what they are and make them see that their sane silence has with violence a lasting pact. That I will conjure ghosts of those raped and buried underneath our feet as we sip on our oolong tea. They're afraid that my kindness is not of the kind catechisms taught. It flows into beings invisible and unusual bonds it will forge. My fierce loving, my bleeding ink, my tongue uncaught, care not for their judgment or denial. They fear that I follow myself alone. And the clicks of their tongues are drum beats that my choices applaud. Uncloaked of false garbs, while through my mind's maze I run, they shun me. They try to keep me on a leash with antiquated, suffocating ideologies, turning for answers to cloaked priests. But my words, unhindered, ask for my release from their moral immoralities. I look at them, and my eyes, even in captivity, gleam free. They're afraid that I do not cower in fear of backlashes or bonded retribution when I let my heart lead me to things untouchable. They're afraid that I choose not to remain behind the mirror they look into. They watch me watch my reflection, laughing joyously at the bend of the river. They fear the kiss between me and my many tongues, afraid to learn that I'm always making love to myself, my oldest lover. I am unfaithful as women are wont to be. They're afraid of the way I walk, burning and lighting up the dark. They're afraid that I have scaled the walls that they have become as water flows over unmoving rocks. My molten words, my disobedient strokes, their instituted lies erase or overcome. They're afraid that I won't come back. They're afraid that I will. And most of all, they're afraid that I'm not afraid like that. Thank you. Thank you.
Since I was moderating this session, I wasn't planning to read. But something happened. 2 months ago, this lady who I've been training with in the gym, her only child, her 26-year-old child, ran up the stairs and jumped out of the window and died. Okay, and we didn't see her after that. And then we got a message from our trainer, our common trainer, saying, Sandhya's going to be coming back to the gym. Don't ask her about her son. Don't ask her about her feelings. Just let her be. And for 2 days, this thought, just let her be. This message came 3 days ago. It was going over and over and over in her head. And yesterday, this poem happened. The name of the poem is Let Me Be. Just let me be. It's another intense poem. If you find me acting strange and disconnected from you and estranged from everything and everyone around us, just know that it's because I've lost myself and I'm struggling to make sense of the world and the state that I'm in. If I'm angry and shouting or I'm precipitous and not present, remember that this is not the person that I am, but a stranger to not just you, but even to myself. So, just let me be. And be kind. And be gentle, because there's nothing else you can do, and actually you don't have a choice either. Don't hurt me more than I'm already hurting. Don't try and rationalize and make sense of something that my headspace cannot understand, because inside, the wiring has gone all awry. Like the electrical circuit board that you've seen that's burnt out and charred in a way that you will only throw it away, yet That's what I am right now, only worse. Not even the cinders inside me know if they will ever repeal. If you left me and went away, I would understand. And in some ways, I wouldn't care, I wouldn't dare imagine that life would ever come back to normal, because normal is a person I will never be. If you must find me again, don't look for me where I live now. Go out and look for me outside, where the stars are or where the sunrise meets the sea. Look for me at the tip of the tallest tree branch, where the early blossoms are beginning to show. Look for me in the glisten of an early morning dewdrop, the one that's short-lived and flickers 3 times before it dies in the colors of the pre-monsoon winds. If I find myself again, if I even do, it will no longer be in the form that you once knew and you got used to. I will exist, if I ever do, only in poems. The ones that speak of love and death and of realities, wrapped in the colored tassels at the end of a broken woman's hand-woven cotton sari. We have 7 minutes left. 10 minutes? Thank you, Kavita. Yeah. Can you see the one for your dad? That'll be the last one.
Our father left his mortal body on 19th, in line with what you shared. So this is dedicated to him. The satin blue turtle on my quilt. The satin blue turtle on my quilt quietly wades through Africa, China, Japan, New Zealand, gliding at will into Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, splashing into indigenous faiths, fluid like the wave it rides. The satin blue turtle on my quilt, here a symbol of fertility, of wisdom, patience, there of power, longevity, tenacity, a bearer of secrets, a prayer, a wish, and a hope that the meaning of life will endure as Mother Earth, as the very foundation on which all else exists. The satin blue turtle on my quilt, its hard shell, the heaven, its soft underbelly, the life beneath. It moves, unhindered, unhurried, unstoppable, here, there, everywhere. Soul speak has no word for boundaries.
Is that your mother? Is that your mother in the front row?
Beautiful poem, Kavita. Now, it kind of takes off from there because I would like to read a poem on my ancestral home. It's titled, In Which I Remember. Grandfather's house, a warren of rooms, all conceivable minor inconveniences housed within intransigent walls, that in all its 142 years refused to believe that electricity was real. Wires snaked across walls and slunk into plug points that were singed at the edges, while bulbs were surreptitiously housed in flower-shaped holders. The house wasn't fooled. The attic was a wonderland I had never been in. But grandmother would swing herself up through a trapdoor and return bearing coconuts or a dead civet. I hid from visitors who'd pull my cheeks, sharing instead a dark room with newborn kittens. Glass squares shone between terracotta roof tiles, through which the freshly dead peeped to ensure I was sufficiently sad on the night of their funeral. Those nights, I would not look upwards. Instead, examine my great aunt's blue stone studded bangles, which she claimed kept her blood pressure in control. I must believe her. When she died, her wrist was bare, her blood had no pressure. Sometimes the house blew a fuse. People became dark, disembodied voices. We would sit, all of us, in the backyard in companionable silence before voices broke out babbling about ancient grouses, tales of actions and consequences, of toddy tappers and women who loved them, of storm nights and harvest days, of meaningful hums and heavy sighs, while disrespectful chickens were trying to sleep, while disrespecting chickens that were trying to sleep. On those nights, grandmother would say, the moonlight is blue. True. In that black to which we had lost our bodies, the moonlight looked icy blue. I'd venture like a pirate on a shaft of moonbeam, then run into her arms when dry leaves rustled. No one minded a bit of cowardice. It ran in the family. They looked kinder in that blue light, a little lovable. One day, I grew up. Now the people are gone, so is the house. Sold to a man who dismantles old houses to sell to resorts. His electric blades, I'm told, were blunted by our wood that refused to believe in saws. Bigger, better saws arrived to see-saw through our moonlit stories. Nothing remains. Ground Zero is now a terrace house. Electrified, gentrified, wiring well hidden, like intentions behind smooth talking walls and obsequious oleaginous tube-light smiles. These days, our moonlight is a white bright. It too has been cleaned. Thank you.
So I'll read a shorter poem, yeah. So this poem is called Fair is Foul. I have taught literature for many, many years, and those of you who are familiar with Shakespeare would know this is how Macbeth opens. The witches cry, fair is foul, foul is fair. So I was thinking, after so many years, how did Shakespeare know that doesn't take being a witch, it just takes being a woman to know that in this world, fair is foul, foul is fair, right? I'm so happy to see so many smiles. So this is where I realized we need to revisit some of this literature and look at it less from the point of view of Macbeth being trapped by the witches, so much as what's the story of these marginalized women? How did they come to be witches? Fair is foul. Fair is foul, foul is fair, they croaked the witches three. And the professor said it was horror, that it was premonition and supernatural, but also a kind of subversion, that being women and outlaws, they sit at the fringes of society and yet know the truth somehow before it comes to pass. A tragedy this, because it is a mockery of power and control. A comedy, as they are laughable and yet they laugh. I followed them home as they gathered up their things, sticks, pots, and inks, and packed up their spells. One had to hear from her husband that she had burnt the soup by overstirring and had the cauldron turned upon her. The other had a court order served where the man who had tried to kill her child as a fetus was trying her for defamation, saying that she had painted her black face white on a date night. The third, attended a group therapy session where she spoke of how when she was a little girl, her grandfather touched her wrong, but her parents called her a liar when she complained. So she knew early on what equivocation meant. The next day, they returned to the forest. The burns on their faces concealed, their eyes tired from lack of sleep, their hearts broken, and their voices joined in a chorus as the three recited together, "Foul is fair, fair is foul." And a man, full of his own want, happened to cross their path. I rewrote my answer. Thank you. I rewrote my answer. I joined in their laughter. I picked up a pen, letting my voice bleed into the bubbling cauldron. Fair is foul, foul is fair indeed, the words churned. I too was a witch who could now read the future. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Time up? One question? Okay, I just have one question to any one of my panelists. If after this session, anyone in the audience is intimidated by poetry, what would your advice be to them? Assuming that you all just fell in love with poetry, but even if there's one person here who's still intimidated, anybody can pick up the mic. Any one of you can pick up the mic and respond. What would your advice be?
May I?
Yeah.
I would simply say stay with poetry. It's not like fiction that one thing will lead to another, it's not a page turner in the sense of other fiction is, right? Just stay with it. Don't expect it to have a climax or a conclusion or something. It's not linear in that sense as a structure. It will give you something without you necessarily completely decoding it and knowing what the story behind it is. So just stay with it. Let it live with you and you'll see it brings all kinds of magic. It is revolutionary to my mind, like no other form of literature can be.
And when that happens, you begin to see poetry everywhere.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yes?